My name is Marlena Owens, and I did my presentation on B.F. Skinner. According to Smith, 2019, B.F. Skinner made significant progress in his theories of operant conditioning and natural selection in the 1950s. Skinner believed that people acted according to the outcome or consequence that they would receive. This has a basis in cognitive science as well as morals. Skinner was influenced mostly by Pavlov and John Watson, which we all know that John Watson was the father of behaviorism. And Skinner derived a lot of his research and influences from these two men in their research. Pavlov is most famous for the salivating dogs, where it was discovered that if a bell was rang and then dogs were fed, if this process was repeated, then the dogs would salivate before the food was even brought out to them. So Skinner really did influence a lot of the behaviorist ideas that we see today. His influences primarily exist in behavior science. And so according to Smith, 2019, B.F. Skinner showed how to conduct an experimental analysis of learned behavior. The experimental analysis of behavior is also referred to as EAB, and has proved to be successful, resulting in progressively expanding body of established fact. It is noted that B.F. Skinner said, "We have seen that in certain respects, operant reinforcement resembles the natural selection of evolutionary theory, just as genetic characteristics which arise as mutations are selected or discarded by their consequences, so novel forms of behavior are selected or discarded through reinforcement." And that was cited by Smith. Skinner is most famous for his concepts of operant conditioning and reinforcement. Operant conditioning means that the same stimulus is repeated and the same consequential behavior will follow. Reinforcement is a term coined by Skinner that can be positive or negative. Positive reinforcement is often used in schools, such as a way to achieve a desired behavior in students. Example of this is like handing out treats at the end of the day for children who behaved appropriately, or allowing students to go outside for recess after completing a complicated assignment. Another example would be winning a prize for attending so many days out of the year in school. Negative reinforcement is the removal of a bad consequence. So examples of this in the classroom would be, getting good grades to avoid a bad grade. Just as in an adult's life, it's important to obey traffic laws to avoid getting a ticket. So Skinner's research consisted of behavioral consequences of a stimulus. He states that even talking can be a form of a stimulus, just like pain. Skinner is most famous for his research with rats. He was able to set up lights inside of a box known as the Skinner box, and in this box, this rat would push a button or a lever to receive positive reinforcement in the form of food. Skinner was also able to prove that rats could distinguish between light and dark, because he found that when he turned the lights out, that the rats did not push the lever as many times as they did when the lights were on. So it was then that Skinner coined the term operant conditioning, which is rewarding acts that are new and desired behavior. Interestingly, though, Skinner's methods are often used in teaching, and a lot of computer programs that teach students actually have adopted his concepts. According to Smith, natural selection operates on habits, and the initial difference among habits is minimal, and the only source of further variation is error of replication. In other words, people learn by receiving natural consequences as well. When undesired outcomes exist, the behavior is likely to decrease, and when desired outcomes exist, then there are more likely to repeat the behaviors. So in conclusion, Skinner was heavily influenced by research of Pavlov and John Watson, who also happens to be the father of behaviorism, Skinner observed Pavlov's dog experiment, where Pavlov coined the term classical conditioning. And in this experiment, Pavlov rang a bell and then fed hungry dogs. And soon after doing this repeatedly, the dogs would begin to salivate after the bell was rang, but before the food had been delivered. Skinner took this experiment a step further and coined his term of operant conditioning, where behaviors are created and modified through forms of reinforcement or punishment. Positive reinforcement is exhibited in Skinner's box study using rats. In this study, rats pressed a lever to receive food, and the food is the positive reinforcement of the behavior of pressing the button. He even took it a step further and discovered that the rat could tell the difference in light and dark by how many times the rats would push the lever in the dark versus the light. Natural selection is another important term created by Skinner, which demonstrates the idea that, behavior and the consequences that follow, and how likely the behavior will be repeated in the future based on the consequences that they receive. According to Smith, there is a critique to Skinner's theories. He did not consider the reasoning behind the reactions to the stimulus. So he simply recorded these reactions, and then he studied the reactions to the stimulus. But what's missing is that why factor. And so what process in the brain would make a dog salivate when the bell rang? Or what process in the brain is activated when a person experiences pain? Which, although we know these answers through neuroscience, Skinner himself did not take it upon himself to understand these concepts. His focus was more on behavior, consequences, repeated actions. Skinner's theory also insinuates that learning only happens through reinforcement, which we know is not true, and also it doesn't consider genetic factors, and also, I think, species-specific behaviors. Because, just because a rat will do something doesn't necessarily mean that a person will do something. So those are just some differences. And here's a picture of Skinner himself, as well as his box. And as you can see, here's an electrical grid. So after he got the rat to pull on the lever and get the food out of the dispenser, he actually added an electrical current to this grid, and then was able to teach the rat was able to figure out that if they pulled the lever, it would shut the electrical current off of the grid. So, there it is. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed.